Chapter 2, on Value. 1. It has been seen in the preceding chapter that there are three distinct species of exchangeable, or economic, quantities, symbolized by the terms money, labor, and credit, the various interchanges of which give rise to six different kinds of exchange. These constitute the science of economics, or political economy, in its most modern definition. It has also been said that the value of any economic quantity is any other economic quantity for which it can be exchanged. To examine these six species of exchange with all their ramifications, would be a complete treatise on economics. In the present work we have only to do with two out of the six species of exchange, viz. the exchange of money for credit, or debts, and the exchange of credit, or debts for credit, or debts, which constitutes the business of banking. We must now investigate the theory of value, which must be equally applicable to all economic quantities, and to all the six species of exchange. The complete theory of value comprises the following: 1. The definition of value. 2. The origin, source, or cause of value. 3. The general law of value. We must now examine each of these separately, and though we wish to avoid controversy as much as possible, we cannot avoid noticing some misconceptions which are still very prevalent, as they have done so much to obscure the theory of credit in recent times. On the definition of value. 2. Value in its original sense is a quality or desire of the mind. It means esteem or estimation, as we speak of a highly valued friend, but such value is not an economic phenomenon. To bring value into economics it must be manifested in some tangible form, just as in the same way, human abilities do not enter into economics unless they are exercised in exchange for something else. Nor does a merchant's credit enter into economics until he actually effects a purchase with it, and gives promise to pay in exchange for some merchandise. So value does not enter into economics until a person manifests his desire, estimation, or value for something by giving something in exchange for it to acquire possession of it. But as one person cannot gain possession of what another person possesses without giving him something in exchange for it, which that person desires, demands, or values, it is evident that for an exchange to take place requires the concurrence of two minds. If a person brought a cargo of wine to a nation of teetotalers, no one would buy it. Such a product would have no value among such a community. So a cargo of tobacco would have no value among a nation of non-smokers. The value of a thing does not depend solely upon the person who offers it for sale, but upon the desire of the purchaser. However much a person may wish to sell any product of his own, yet if no one will buy it, it has no value. If an exchange takes place, it can only be from the reciprocal desire of two persons, each for the goods of the other. 3. When, therefore, two persons agree to exchange their products, each product may be considered as the measure of the desire of its possessor to obtain the product of the other person. The two products, therefore, reciprocally measure the desire of their possessors to obtain the product of the other, and when the respective persons have agreed upon the quantities of their products which are to be exchanged, the two products are said to be of equal value. Each product is said to be the value of the other, and this is the only kind of value with which economics is concerned. Thus let A and B be any two economic quantities which are exchanged at any moment, then we may say, a val B or A is of the value of B, or A equals B, then B is the value of A, in terms of B, and A is the value of B, in terms of A. Thus, as the Physiocrates said, value consists in the relation of exchange which takes place between such and such a product, between such a quantity of one product and such a quantity of another. 4. Hence it is clear that value is a ratio, or an equation. It is like distance. It necessarily requires two objects. The value of a thing is always something external to itself. It is absolutely impossible to predicate that any quantity has value, without at the same time implying that it can be exchanged for something, and of course everything it can be exchanged for is its value in that commodity. It is impossible to say that any quantity has value, without at the same time stating value in what, whether bread, or shoes, or cloth, or money, or anything else. So it is impossible to say that a town has distance unless we state the place it is distant from. We can no more say that a quantity is worth, than we can say that London is distant. And as any place is of different distances from other places, So any quantity has as many values as other quantities it can be exchanged for. Now suppose B is above is 10 guineas, then A may be either of the other three species of economic quantities. It may be a material product like a watch, or it may be an immaterial product, such as so much instruction in science or literature, or so much amusement as so much acting, or any other service or labor, or it may be an incorporeal product, as a debt, under the form of a banknote, or a bill of exchange, or so much public stock, or any other species of incorporeal property. Each of these species of property is of the value of 10 guineas, and therefore it manifestly follows that each of them must be equal to each other, for things which are equal to the same thing are equal to one another. But B may be either of the three species of economic quantities as well as A. Therefore any economic quantity may have value in terms of any of the others. The value of the goods in the merchants' and traders' warehouses is the money in the pockets of their customers. The value of the money in the pockets of the public is the various products and services it can purchase. The value of a professor's lectures is the fees paid to him by his students. The value of the lawyer's, physician's, surgeon's talents is the income he can earn. The value of an incorporeal right, or promise, is the thing which may be demanded or promised. The value of a 5 litres. Note is 5 sovereigns. The value of a postage stamp is the carriage of a letter. The value of a promise, or pledge, to cut a man's hair is the cutting of the hair. The value of a railway ticket is the journey. The value of an order to see the zoological gardens is being admitted to see them. The value of an order to see the play is seeing the play. Suppose the price of getting one's hair cut is a shilling. Suppose I want my hair cut. What difference does it make to me whether I have a shilling in my pocket, or the pledge of the hairdresser to cut it? Is it not clear that in this case the shilling and the promise are of exactly the same value to me? Suppose I want a loaf of bread which costs a shilling. What difference does it make to me whether I have a shilling in my pocket, or a promise of a baker to give me the bread? Are not the shilling and the promise of exactly the same value to me in this case? In short, suppose that I want any product or service at all. What difference does it make to me whether I have the money in my pocket to purchase it, or a promise from someone to render me the product or service? Are not the money and the promise of exactly the same value to me in each separate case? Each separate tradesman only, of course, promises to render some particular product, and as this product is not demandable from anyone but the person who has given the pledge, it has, of course, only particular value. Now what is money? It is nothing but the generalized right, or power, to demand whichever of these products or services we may require at any time. Is it not clear, therefore, that money is a general right, while each of these pledges is a particular right? Is it not clear, therefore, that each of these separate rights is of the same nature as money, only inferior in degree, and that they are economic quantities, or wealth, for the very same reason that money is, and that money is nothing but a stored up or accumulated general power or right, of demanding all products and services? Is it not clear that, if a man had his pocket full of promises or pledges by solvent persons to render him all the products and services he wanted, he would be just as wealthy as if he had so much money? Hence we see the perfect justice of the Roman law, under the title of wealth or money. Rights are included. These rights, then, being clearly shown to have value, and to be wealth, like any material products, they may be bought and sold and exchanged like any material products. A right to demand a loaf of bread may be exchanged against a right to have one's hair cut. And all these rights are economic quantities, or wealth, as much as any material products. They are the most colossal species of property in this country, and articles of the most gigantic commerce, whose mechanism is the subject matter of this work. As the value of anything is solely anything else it can be exchanged for, it is manifest that if it can be exchanged for nothing, it has no value. No matter what qualities it may possess, if no one else wants it, and will give nothing for it, it has no more value for its owner, than if he were in the center of the desert of Sahara. Many persons have almost a difficulty in believing that money could have no value. But Smith himself says that if a guinea could not be exchanged for anything, it would be of no more value than a bill upon a bankrupt. Say says that things can only be valued by an exchange. This is strictly in accordance with the doctrine of all ancient writers and of the physiocrats. Thus a recent writer describing the splendor of the houses in some of the remote country districts of Spain says, "Houses and splendid furniture in such places are nearly valueless, because there is no one to hire the former, or to buy the latter." 5. Having thus enforced the doctrine that the value of any economic quantity is any other economic quantity for which it can be exchanged, there is only one further thing which need be noticed here. Price is the value of a quantity in money or one credit only. Now if money or credit be excessively abundant, the prices of all things will rise, but they will still preserve their relative values among themselves. For if a loaf of bread and a pound of meat each cost 6 pence, and if in consequence of the excessive abundance of money or credit, they each rise to a shilling, the pound of meat is still of the value of a loaf of bread. Hence there may be a general rise or a general fall of prices. But there can be no such thing as a general rise or a general fall of values. Everything can no more rise or fall with respect to everything else, than, as Mill says, a dozen runners can each outrun all the rest, or 100 trees can all overtop one another. To suppose that all things could rise relatively to each other would be to realize Pat's idea of society, where every man is as good as his neighbor, and a great deal better too. On the error of the expression intrinsic value. 6. We must now say something about an expression which has been the source of enormous confusion in economics, and has especially obscured the theory of credit. All ancient writers kept their minds firmly fixed on a thing which anything could be exchanged for as its value, or something external to itself, and we have not found in them any trace of such a confusion of ideas as the expression intrinsic value. But their writings on the subject seem to have been totally forgotten. In modern times, when men began to consider the subject of wealth, gold and silver were long held to be the only species of wealth, because they outlasted everything else, which wasted away while they remained. When men began to see the absurdity of considering specie to be the only wealth, they looked to some quality of the thing itself, as constituting a thing wealth, and then they began to speak of intrinsic value. So long ago as 1696, an able writer, Barbon, pointed out the confusion which had arisen from mistaking the absolute qualities of a thing for the thing it would exchange for. He says, "There is nothing that troubles this controversy more than for want of distinguishing between value and virtue. Value is only the price of things, that can never be certain, because it must be there at all times, and in all places, of the same value. Therefore nothing can have an intrinsic value. But things have an intrinsic virtue in themselves, which in all places have the same virtue, as the lodestone to attract iron, and the several qualities that belong to herbs and drugs, some purgative, some diuretical, and c. But these things, though they may have great virtue, may be of small value, or no price, according to the place where they are plenty or scarce, as the red nettle, though it be of excellent virtue to stop bleeding, yet here it is a weed of no value from its plenty. And so are spices and drugs in their own native soil of no value, but as common shrubs or weeds, but with us of great value, and yet in both places of the same excellent intrinsic virtue. Again, for things have no value in themselves, it is opinion and fashion brings them into use and gives them a value." Barbon thus puts his finger on the very thing which is the bane of economics at this very day, the expression intrinsic value, which is confounding an intrinsic quality with an external relation. When men in modern times began to see the absurdity of restricting the term wealth to gold and silver, they first extended it to mean the annual products of the earth which are useful to men. Thus Cantillon says, 6. The earth is the source or matter from whence all riches are produced. The physiocrats defined wealth to be all the material products of the earth which are brought into commerce. Smith began his work by saying that the real wealth of a country is the annual produce of land and labor, but in the course of it he enumerates the abilities of men as fixed capital and paper credit as circulating capital. Economists then confine their attention solely to things of value, the produce of labor, including no doubt the principle of exchangeability as appertaining to wealth, but only as a secondary and subordinate one, not as the sole and exclusive one, as it was by ancient writers. Then they began to consider that things would exchange in proportion to the labor employed in producing them. Thus the value of a thing was considered to depend on the quantity of labor employed to produce it. Thus the quantity of labor embodied as it were in the thing came to be counted as its value, and value thus came to be called intrinsic. This unhappy phrase intrinsic value meets us at every turn in modern economics. And yet the slightest reflection will show that to define value to be something external, and then to be constantly speaking of intrinsic value, are utterly self-contradictory and inconsistent ideas. Thus over and over again it is repeated in economical works that money has intrinsic value, but that a banknote, or a bill of exchange is only the representative of value. Money no doubt is the produce of labor, but, as Smith observes, if it would exchange for nothing it would have no value. So that after all Smith comes to exchangeability as the principle of value. How then can its value be intrinsic? How can anything have intrinsic value, unless it has the things it will exchange for inside itself? Money will exchange for anything: corn, houses, lands, horses, carriages, books, etc. And each of these is the value of the money with respect to that commodity. But which of these is its intrinsic value? It is quite clear that money has not intrinsic but general value, because it is generally exchangeable throughout the country. But place it among a race of savages, and where would its value be? Persons throughout a country will always be ready to give things in exchange for the money of the country, hence money has general and permanent value, but manifestly not intrinsic value. All economists admit that a banknote payable on demand is of the value of money. And why is it so? Simply because it is exchangeable for money. A bill of exchange on a solvent merchant has value, simply because at a certain time, it will be exchanged for money. Hence it is clear that banknotes and bills of exchange have value for precisely the same reason that money has, and no other, viz. that they are exchangeable for something else. When money can be exchanged it has value. When it cannot be exchanged it has no value. When a bill or note can be exchanged it has value. When it cannot be exchanged it has no value. Hence we see that the value of money and credit of all kinds is essentially of the same nature, though there may be different degrees of it. A piece of credit by the unanimous doctrine of all lawyers, all economists, and all merchants, is an article of merchandise, and an exchangeable commodity, just as much as money or any other goods. The expression intrinsic value is so common that persons are apt to overlook its incongruity of idea, but if we use words of similar import whose meaning has not been so corrupted, the absurdity will be at once apparent. Thus whoever heard of an intrinsic distance, or an intrinsic ratio? The absurdity of these phrases is apparent at once. But they are not more absurd than intrinsic value. To say that money because it is material, and the produce of land and labor has intrinsic value, and that a bill or note is only the representative of value, is as absurd as to say that a wooden yard measure is intrinsic distance, and that the space between 2 points 1 yard apart is the representative of distance. Other writers indeed consider the value of a thing to be the quality which makes it desired. But this also is an error. The value of a thing is any other thing for which it can be exchanged. Economics has nothing to do with the agreeable or useful qualities of things, but only with their external relations to other things, and it must always be remembered that economics is a pure science of ratios. On the distinction between depreciation and diminution in value. 7. We must now observe the difference between two expressions, which, though often used indiscriminately, are essentially distinct, viz. diminution in value and depreciation. An alteration in value of any commodity means that the quantity of it which was considered as an equivalent for a certain amount of some other commodity with which it is compared, has undergone a change. Depreciation means that it is not really of the value it professes to be. Alteration in value of a commodity is always used in reference to some other commodity with which it is compared. Depreciation in reference to itself. Thus if at any given time an ounce of gold will exchange for 15 ounces of silver, and if owing to any great and sudden increase of the quantity of silver, while the quantity of gold remains the same, 1 ounce of gold becomes able to purchase 20 ounces of silver, then silver is said to have sustained a diminution of value with respect to gold. Or if, while silver remained the same, gold became very scarce, so that 1 ounce of gold would purchase 20 ounces of silver, then gold would be said to have risen in value with respect to silver. But if a banknote which professes to be of the value of 5 sovereigns, will only purchase 4 sovereigns, it is depreciated. Or if a guinea which professes to contain a certain fixed weight of pure gold, does not contain that amount, it is depreciated. The expression diminution in value is applied both to commodities and money. The word depreciation is more usually applied to money. When an analogous change takes place in commodities, it is usually called deterioration. These distinctions are very necessary to be observed in all discussions regarding the value of coins which retain the same name during a long series of ages. The pound of money in the days of William the Conqueror really meant a pound weight of silver bullion, and silver was the only money. Since then, silver has greatly increased in quantity, and other things are used as money, which have greatly tended to diminish its value. It is said, though of course all such statements are extremely difficult to verify, that silver has fallen to 1/12 of its value in those times. Not only has the value of the metal greatly diminished, but also the coinage is greatly deteriorated. The shilling was originally the 20th part of a pound weight of silver, it is now only the 62nd part. Hence it is said that a shilling will only command the 36th part of what it formerly would. But as great changes have taken place in everything else as well, it would be difficult to prove this. These causes affecting the value of coins which retain their names through long periods, may act in the same or opposite directions. It is quite easy to imagine that a coin, though greatly deteriorated, or diminished from its original weight, may in consequence of the increased value of the material of which it is composed, be able to purchase as much as it would have done originally. It is sometimes alleged that this happened at Rome. The first coinage of Rome was copper, and this metal was found in great abundance for some time after the foundation of the city. The first measure of value was the as, which was a pound weight of copper. The as was subsequently reduced to the 12th part of its weight, and some writers say that in consequence of the great scarcity of the metal, it had increased so much in value, that the deteriorated coinage would purchase as much as the full pound would originally. This may be so, or not, but it in no way affects the argument. It might very possibly have been so. These considerations greatly affect the public in the matter of public debts. The state agrees at a particular time, to pay a fixed quantity of bullion, either forever or for a long period, to the public creditors. Now, even supposing all other things to remain the same, the value of the money may vary greatly during long periods, either from the increased scarcity, or the increased abundance of the metal, and either the state or its creditors may be grievously affected by these changes. On the origin, source, or cause of value. 8. We have seen that there are 3 species of economic quantities, each containing many varieties, which have value. We have seen that the value of any quantity is any other quantity for which it can be exchanged. We now come to the second branch of our inquiry: what is the cause, or source, of value, and whence does it originate? Now when we are to search for the cause, or source of value, it may be as well to understand what it is we are searching for. There is a very great number of things of several different natures which all have value. We must manifestly search for some single cause which is common to them all, which being present, value is present, which when it increases, value increases, which when it decreases, value decreases, and which being absent, value is absent. Now as we have defined the value of a thing to be any other quantity for which it is exchanged, it is evident that there must be at least 2 parties to economic value. And as exchanges are voluntary, each of the 2 parties must have some product, and each must desire, or be in want of the product of the other. Hence reciprocal demand is the cause of value. Aristotle said long ago that it is demand which binds society together. Here it is quite clear that we have got the true source, or origin, or cause of value. It is demand. Value is not a quality of an object, but an affection of the mind. The sole origin, source, or cause of value is human desire. When there is a demand for things, they have value. When the demand increases, the supply being supposed the same, the value increases. When the demand decreases, the value decreases, and when the demand altogether ceases, the value is altogether gone. The whole body of ancient writers made demand the sole origin of value, and they showed that demand or value is the inducement to labor eo impendi laborem ac periculum magna premia proponentur. In modern times, Boyce Gilbert saw this very clearly. He says consummation, demand, is the principle of all wealth. All the revenues, or rather all the riches of the world, both of a prince and his subjects, only consist in consummation, demand. All the most exquisite fruits of the earth, and the most precious products would be nothing but rubbish if they were not consommes, demanded. So Hume says, our passions, desires or demand, are the only causes of labor. The Italian economists are very clear and consistent in showing that human wants or desires are the cause of all value. Genovese shows that the words used indiscriminately, priestso, stima, valuta, valor, are words of relation, and not absolute, and that they are not applied to intrinsic qualities. That though money is the apparent or proximate measure, the ultimate measure to which not only things, but their price, is referred is man himself. Nothing has value where there are no men, and the very things which have a low price where men are few, have a very high price where there are many people. Men however do not give value to things or services, unless they want them. Hence our wants are the first source of the value of all things, and price is the power to satisfy our wants. He says that the wants of men are the first source of the value of everything, and of all labor, and that value is the child of demand. So Beccaria says, value is a substance which measures the estimation in which men hold things. Condillac is also very clear on this point. This esteem is what is called value. Since the value of things is founded on the want of them, or the demand, it is natural that a want more strongly felt gives things a greater value, and a want less felt gives them less value. The value of things increases with their scarcity, and decreases with their abundance. It may even, on account of this abundance, decrease to nothing. A superfluity, for example, will be without value whenever we can make no use of it. The physiocrats, or first school of economists, made all value proceed or arise from demand, and they showed that things which remain without demand, consummation, are without value. Anything has value when it is exchangeable. When it is not exchangeable it has no value. It is often supposed that Smith proved that labor is the source of all value and of all wealth. But Smith's doctrines are quite contradictory on this subject, as we have fully pointed out in our Principles of Economical Philosophy, and Theory and Practice of Banking. And Smith himself says that if a guinea would exchange for nothing it would have no value. It is well known that a considerable number of writers have asserted that labor is the cause of all value. But anyone who reflects on this assertion must see its utter fallacy. The simple observation that however much a person may labor on producing a thing, if no one will buy it, it has no value, must at once show the fallacy of it. Moreover, there are abundance of things which have value upon which no labor was ever bestowed. It is this doctrine that labor is the cause of all value, and that all wealth is produced from the earth, which has done so much to obscure and confuse the theory of credit. Whereas when we consider exchangeability as the sole essence and principle of value, the whole subject becomes perfectly clear and simple. A banknote or a bill of exchange has value because it can be exchanged for money, and money has value solely because it can be exchanged for other things. An order or note of hand, says Mill, or bill payable at sight for an ounce of gold, while the credit of the giver is unimpaired, is worth neither more nor less than the gold itself, that is of exactly the same value as gold. And it is for this reason that jura, rights, are termed wealth in Roman law. They are pecunia, res, bona, mers, because they can be bought and sold. And it is the commerce in this species of merchandise which is the subject matter of this work. On the general law of value, or the general equation of economics. 9. Having in the preceding sections given the definition of value, and found that its form or cause resides exclusively in the human mind, the last branch of our inquiry is to determine the general law of value, or the general equation of economics, that is to discover a single general law which governs the exchangeable relations of all quantities, whatever their nature, at all times, and under all circumstances. The acknowledged principles of inductive science show us that there can be but one general law of value. We have seen in the preceding chapter that there are three distinct species of economic quantities, and we have generalized the fundamental conceptions of the science so as to grasp all these quantities. Now these three species of quantities can be exchanged in sx different ways. Our present object is to investigate a general equation which shall be applicable to all the six species of exchanges indifferently. The law which governs the exchangeable relations of material products must equally govern the exchangeable relations of debts. Suppose we make pound the general symbol of an economic quantity, that is to say anything whatever whose value may be measured, and representing these various species of quantities under the general symbol pound, we may affirm that there can be but one cause of value for them all, which we have shown to be demand, and there can be but one general law which governs their exchangeable relations. Now let A and B be any two economic quantities of any form whatever, then supposing that A remains the same while B varies with respect to A, then B or the value of A, will vary from four causes. It will increase 1. From a diminution in quantity. 2. From an increase of demand. It would diminish 1. From an increase of quantity. 2. From a diminution of demand. Now as the variations of value of the other quantity are influenced by exactly the same four causes, it is quite clear that the variations of both quantities will be influenced by 8 independent causes, and if these be connected in the form of an algebraical equation, that will manifestly be the true general equation of economics. The above is the full expression of what is commonly called the law of supply and demand. It means this, that no change can take place in the exchangeable relations of any two economic quantities unless there is some change in the intensity of demand or the limitation of supply, of one, or both of the two quantities.